Welcome to Childhood Trash, a dumpster dive into our childhood nostalgia where we re-examine the most influential media from our youth in order to answer the question, tragic or nostalgic. I'm your host, Pila Plaka, joined by my co-host,
Maggie Keating.
Hi, Maggie.
Hi. So today we have a very fun episode.
Yes, we have a special guest, and we're going to be interviewing him.
Yeah, our very special guest today, his name is Mark Hofeling.
Yes, is our guest today, and he is a production designer of many a DCOM and has done many other things.
Yes.
That we're excited to talk with him about. I'm very excited.
Yeah, me
I'm
too. He's worked on some huge projects.
And has been such an integral part of those classic, I feel like, Disney movies.
Something that is so classic about Disney movies is the sets.
Yeah.
Literally every time we talk about, especially the ones from the earlier 2000s, and he's done a lot of those, we are always like, oh my god, the bedroom looks so cool. I always wanted a Disney Channel bedroom growing up.
Yeah, for sure.
So I think he's really very talented. I don't know,
sure.
Very cool.
Yeah.
He's done a lot of really interesting stuff. To name a few:
High School Musical,
all of the Descendants movies, the Wizards of Waverly Place movie, Teen Beach movie. He worked on Zombies. In fact,
with our bestie.
Yeah. The way we connected with Mark is Mark has worked with our pal Paul Hohen, who we did an interview with a few weeks ago. That went live a few weeks ago.
It was a few months ago for us.
But they've worked together on a lot of projects, so
yes.
It's very cool that we get to interview two people who work on the same thing.
I feel like Mark's mostly worked with Paul and also Kenny Ortega a lot. Those two are his pairings. And are we next gonna get Kenny Ortega on the pod? I don't know.
I'm dying to know.
Anyway, let's get into the interview.
Thank you so much for agreeing to do this with us. We really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. I really respect what you guys are doing, and I think it's an important lesson that, if you're, especially for people who work kind of behind the camera, if you're interested in what somebody's doing, just ask them, because, we don't get a lot of attention. So we're happy to talk about lives and careers and stuff like that. So please, if you're looking for other professionals to talk to in the future, don't be shy to reach out to them, because I'll bet, unless they're just, a-holes, that they would be willing to have a conversation with you.
We've definitely learned that. We just sometimes we just have meetings where we spend half an hour sending out emails to a bunch of people.
Yeah.
So
good.
Really pleasantly surprising how many people are so open to talking to us. And
good. So you have been getting good responses.
Yeah, we have. Yeah, that's how we connected with
Paul.
And we talked to some other writers and stuff too, which was really cool for us. So yeah, and we just I don't know, our podcast is very small, but it's it's a really nice experience for us.
It's a labor of love.
It's a labor of love.
We're really so excited about the things that we're doing. So we hope that comes across.
Yeah.
In what we're doing.
Yeah. Well, this is how you build an audience, is you take it seriously, and you have good conversations, and you try to find good guests, and before you know it, you're podcasters and living large on podcaster dough.
I wish.
Maybe one day.
One day.
Yeah.
Help with those student loans.
Exactly. Yeah. We can just
hop into the question.
You guys say when. I'm all yours.
Great.
Alrighty.
Cool.
So we kind of wanted to start with a very general question, just for our viewers and who don't really know anything about production design. So can you explain what exactly does a production designer do?
Yeah, well, it is a good question, because it's quite a broad job. So a production designer, in the briefest possible description, is kind of the architect of a movie, but you flesh that description out a little bit more. We're basically responsible for everything on camera that isn't alive. The room or the setting that a scene is in, the color palette, the items that are in that room or, exterior space, the selection of locations, if it's location versus build, the design of a space of its build, all the way down to the kind of wedding ring that a character might be wearing, or the watch they're wearing, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes from the very broad, like a house or an office, to the very specific, like the letterhead on paperwork and what typeface is used on paperwork that's in camera, right? So it's quite a large brief that production designers have.
So you've also worked as a prop master, a set designer, and an art director. How do those jobs compare? And
well, it's to get to a lot of the jobs in the business, it's there's kind of an apprenticeship, working your way up to where you want to be. Now, of course, you can go to school as you two are, and especially, am I understanding correctly that you want to be writers in? Yeah. So obviously, for someone like a writer, you're probably going to want to go to school, learn about story structure and narrative arc and all that kind of all that jazz. And unlike me, learn how to spell things. But in other jobs, it's a bit more of an apprenticeship. So, for instance, if you were a grip or an electrician, or had certain jobs under the larger purview of the art department, you would most likely be better off just getting a job in the industry and working your way up through a department and learning the ropes of being on set. And let's take a grip, for instance, like how you lay dolly track, how light stands and C stands work, the different sorts of cranes and dollies and things like that. It's all very, very technical. You can certainly learn some of that in school, no question, but you're going to learn probably a lot more in a movie or two than you're going to learn in a lot of schooling doing that. So anyway, that's a long way of saying, when I was doing things like being a prop master, which was not the happiest time of my life. It is a very difficult job and very detail oriented, which kind of is not, I deal with details, but kind of as a drive-by. It's so detail oriented, and it's such finite things, and it's just such masses of stuff, and keeping track of them, because scenes are shot, scene 26 may shoot over 3 different non-connected days. And is the cigarette the same length as it was in this scene? Is there this much liquid in the glass as there wasn't? Forget it. Now, there are people who are very good at that, and I am grateful they exist. But so anyway, I did prop master a few things. Art directing is a very common stepping stone to production design. Also a different discipline. It's for instance, on a Navy ship, you would have the captain, who kind of is in charge of the broad brushstrokes, and then their first mate or executive officer is the one who really runs the ship. Well, that's kind of what the art director is. They're in charge of the crew and making sure information is properly disseminated and budgets are handled, and all the while dealing with the difficult creative personality that production designers can be. Yeah, so that was just a way of working my way up to designer.
Nice.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That's interesting. We go to Emerson College in Boston, which is a pretty big film school as well. So it's we definitely, I mean, at least in my experience, I know a lot of like people here. I have friends that want to be production designers. So it's like interesting to see like the difference. So you would recommend like really getting into the industry head on instead of like going to
it kind of depends. People come, especially for production designer, there's not really one road. There's kind of a lot of ways in. And you could go to school and learn all about, like, I know that some does your school offer production design as a specialty now? Is it like
it might be
a degree?
Like, so I think the degree is like visual, like media arts. And then there's like, you would like specialize in production design or like cinematography or editing or something like that.
Yeah, see, I think that would definitely be worth pursuing. because there's so much of what I do and other production designers do to learn exclusively on the job. For instance, drafting, now, all of the design programs, Maya and Rhino, and you can certainly learn all that stuff on your own, but it's great to have instruction in that. And especially for younger professionals in the film industry, they're just kind of expected in the art department, they're kind of expected to know all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I think there is a good argument to be made for staying in school. And there's also a good argument for finding a production and saying, I want to learn everything about the art department. And the art department is a huge
thing.
Department, generally oftentimes the biggest department on any show. So there, even within the department, there's, the traditional art department, which is just like the people right around the production designer who generate the drawings, who disseminate the designs, the graphic designers, the set designers, the people who kind of push out the ideas. And then there's the set decoration department. And so, for instance, if I design and build a room, then, if I design a room, paint and construction, build the room, set decoration dresses it with everything in it, tables, chairs, window coverings, floor coverings, lighting fixtures, and then props comes in and puts that final layer of everything an actor might touch. Right. So those are kind of the breakdowns. And within all that, there's all these really cool specialties, right? There's so much to know, like just in, like, say, the set decoration department, they're furniture movers, but there's so much more. They invest in what we really do as art department, which is build backstory, right? So we're visual storytellers, and I can tell you more in a frame of film than a writer, sorry, not to knock on writers, than a writer or director can tell you in pages of exposition and dialogue, because boom, is this person a hoarder? Are they a serial killer? Are they, there's so much information that can be conveyed visually that way. So like a person who works in the set decoration department, they might move the stuff into a space, but then it's like, a good example is I had a decorator one time say to me, we were doing a motel in the desert, and it was just a quick scene in the motel office, like two lines of dialogue, just a throwaway scene that we had to have. And the set decorator said to me, what if the woman who works there is really into owls? And I said, that's great. What a great, we're in the middle of the desert, and here's this person who's just in. And so he kind of filled up the office with all this owl paraphernalia. And it was funny for us to do, and it was amusing for us, we amused ourselves, but it told a story, right? It wasn't just a generic nobody who worked in this place. It was somebody with this whole story that you're never going to get to hear. And that it's those layers of those tissues of ideas that really make a project sing,
Definitely. We know you already touched on this a little bit, but we wanted to know, like, how you decided to get into production design, like that's the that you wanted to follow.
I'll try to be as brief as possible, because obviously that's not my gift. I need writers to edit me. I grew up in Salt Lake City in the 70s, and under a very certain suffocating orthodoxy that is prevalent there, and it wasn't a very happy time, not a terribly functional family. So when I got the opportunity to see movies and to watch stories, on television, there was just all this color and light, and it took me out of my world for a minute. And so that escape and those departures really were incredibly important for my mental health and my well-being. And I also had this very turbocharged imagination. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I would see something in a movie that would excite me. And I would try to make my bedroom, my corner, I shared with my brothers, but try to make my corner of the bedroom like a Star Wars thing or a Lord of the Rings thing. So I was kind of a set designer when I was 6, right? I was a production designer as a kid trying to create this fantasy space that I could live inside of. It's very cliche for a Gen Xer to say this, but when I was 8, I think, my dad took us to see the opening day of the first Star Wars movie. And, my eyes were like this. It was so amazing. And in one of his better moments, he leaned over to me and said, there's people who make all that stuff, and it was just like that. At 8 years old, like, that's the job I want. And yeah, it was that obvious. And then, it was pre-internet times, and Salt Lake City was a backwater. I mean, it's kind of a backwater now, but you can imagine in the 70s, it was just so nowhere in this square state, high desert, weirdness. And my family wasn't terribly sophisticated in the way that a lot of that you would require to find your way to film school or something. So I just kind of farted around and got close to having an art degree, or was pursuing an art degree at the university, just a standard art, not film or anything, fine arts degree. And because my parents also were hoarders, like, we had all this shit, we had all this stuff.
Yeah.
And my dad was crazy about hoarding construction materials. And we had all of these piles and piles of construction materials that were just rotting in the desert sun next to the freeway. And as random chance would have it, an art director was in town doing Halloween 5. Now, I don't know why Halloween 5 came to Salt Lake. I don't know what attracted it, the business to the state, close to LA, I guess. This guy's like, wow, I need to get some of that stuff to build this shack I got to build. So long story short, he got a hold of my dad, and that stuff, that it was garbage, but it was more precious to my dad than gold. I still don't understand. He said, what do you want for, 5 truckloads of this stuff? And my dad said, well, I got this weird kid, and if you just talk to him. And so I went and talked to this guy and ended up working on Halloween 5 for like a month. And then he called me later that year and said, I got 3 horror movies in the Northwoods of Wisconsin, of all places. And I withdrew from all my college classes and just flew off to the frozen Northwoods. And I clung to that guy like grim death for several shows. And then that got me to LA and just kind of half starved my way into a career out there.
That is so cool.
That's crazy. Like,
a lot of luck, a lot of weird luck out of the ashes of a lot of unhappiness, I guess. So take from that what you will.
I think that's really interesting. I think a lot of artists in general just like they come upon their art as like a way to escape too. And like I in my experience, I definitely I knew what I wanted to do when I was in second grade. Same. So I think that,
oh, really? To write specifically for media, or
for like books and stuff like that. Yeah. I just
gotcha.
Gave me a journal once, and I was like, oh, this is it. So,
I know, so many journals.
So
yeah, it's funny, isn't it? Like how soon the person we're going to be kind of reveals itself to to us and our families. Like I said, I was making sets in my bedroom when I was 6 years old, and I didn't even understand that's what I was doing. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah,
that's funny.
So one thing that kind of stood out to us, obviously, because of the nature of our podcast, is your experience working with Disney and the Disney Channel.
Yes.
And wanted to know how you got into that whole Disney world.
Yeah, it's kind of the weird luck of a moment, and careers are, you can plan as much as you want, but things are just going to happen, and other things aren't going to happen, right? There's going to be plenty of moments of disappointment, and then some random door is going to open. And being freelancers, like, you know, if you guys are writers, you're going to kind of be freelancers for the most part, I would think too. Being a freelancer means knowing when to run through the door, right? And then once you get to be my age, it's also knowing when to walk back out the door. I was part of a very fledgling film community in Utah, in Salt Lake City. It had been around for a long time, but it was small. It was really, really a small industry. And the Disney Channel, back when they were doing extremely modest budgets, like very, very small, well under $10 million. Like, I don't know for sure their entire history, but I know some of these movies were like under 5 million, which by today's standards is incredibly small budget. So I think there was enough of a film infrastructure in Utah, and it was an hour's flight from Los Angeles, and it was non-union. And so the general cost was a lot cheaper to make movies there. So the channel started sending, you know, they were making movies in other markets as well, but they started sending some of these tiny movies to Utah, and I was like, oh man, it would be great to get in with Disney. I didn't set out to work in young people's programming, right? I didn't care, like, I'll make whatever, that's the job, right? We're hired guns. But, you know, it's Disney, you know, the checks are going to clear, right? It's not like fly by night family film company. It's like it's the big show. They had a production designer that was an older guy that had been doing these movies in Utah. And he just happened to be offered a series. And a series is very tempting because they're longer term. You end up making more money per project generally than on a movie. So he took this series, and they were really mad at him. And they said, well, you got to find somebody to replace you. And I was probably close to 30, might have still been in my 20s. And I was the next warm body standing there. And they said, here, you do it. And I was super excited. So the first movie I did for them was called Buffalo Dreams. Do you guys remember that one? Really tiny show. It was sweet. It was nice. It wasn't a musical. It wasn't one of the big splashy ones. Little story about a kid that his family moves down close to a fictional reservation, and he kind of learns about native life and they're a buffalo. And so I did that, and I guess I didn't screw it up. So they gave me another one, and I did that and didn't screw it up. And I think the next one in the pile, the next script in the low budget pile, was called High School Musical.
Yeah, I was like, immediately when you were like, oh, I'm from Salt Lake City, I was like, oh,
High School
Musical. Got it.
Yeah. Just luck, right? Just the luck of being there and being available and being willing. And so, at the time, High School Musical was just a standard 90-page script. It had no songs in it. It had no, there was an intention that there would be songs, but they weren't in the script. And nobody really, I'm kind of a bad homosexual in that I didn't grow up with musicals, and it just wasn't part of my world, right? So I didn't have any experience with them, and neither did any of the people I was working with the local people in this production. And that's when Hurricane Kenny blew into town. And just took charge of the whole thing, and we were off to the races. And I will always, always, always remember that project with such great fondness, because he was so kind to me and so generous. And I said, look, I'm going to figure this out and I'm going to make this work, but I really don't know a ton. And he said, well, come with me. And so I went to auditions with him. I had never seen anything like it, like room after room after room of these talented kids coming in and doing, 90 seconds of get your head in the game, a choreographed bit. And then I would sit in music meetings with Kenny as he talked to the resident genius, one of the truly, truly, truly secret weapons of the Disney Channel is a guy who works there called Steve Vincent, who you should look up Steve Vincent. He will talk to you. You should call the channel and talk to Steve Vincent and tell him I sent you, because I believe Steve started as an assistant and he has been the music supervisor on every musical they've ever done. So if he was an independent producer, the guy would have platinum up and down the hallways for days, right? Like all the Camp Rock, all the High School Musicals, all the Zombies, all the Descendants, everything that was kind of the successful musical, he's the secret sauce behind it. So anyway, he's a great guy too. He'd love to talk to you. He'd be wonderful for you guys to talk to. So I would sit in the meetings and, you know, they'd start talking about music and Steve would send out, he'd come back with a CD from a composer or a composing team, and they would have done a temp track for a song. And I'm like, wow, I don't get it, but this is, what a cool process. Like, I'm not really understanding it. And then when the cast showed up and they started getting the dance crew together, Kenny invited me to go see rehearsals. And I'm just like, wow, how do you even pick who's good and who's bad? They all look amazing to me. And you could tell that Disney was really starting to smell that something special was happening. And so all the execs started showing up all the time from LA. And the first musical number I ever saw in my career, which is now large I've done over, I don't know, probably 120 musical numbers. If you look at all my movies combined, the first one I ever saw a full run through of in costume on set with the playback, all the choreography, was Status Quo.
Wow.
From High School Musical 1 in the cafeteria. And I'm standing there watching this all go on. And I just got the chills. And I was like, oh my God, this is the coolest thing ever. I got to tell you, making non-musicals is pretty boring after all these experiences. So anyway, that was the origin of the tween musical. And remember, High School Musical predated Glee. It was Kenny Ortega and Disney and that project that put the tween musical back at the tip of the spear of youth culture, and it just happened overnight.
That's so interesting that like Kenny like involved you more with like the auditions and the rehearsals and things like that. This is like a question we got from someone to ask you. Are you by any chance like aware of why they didn't have Zac Efron sing?
I am. I think at the time, I think Zach was 15 or 16. I think he was 15 when he landed the role. And that's a whole nother story, that his family, came from a very modest family, and they didn't live in LA. And when he wanted to audition, they'd have to go to LA and get a motel. And they didn't really have a lot of money for it. And so the High School Musical audition was like the last thing they were going to do. They said, as I recall, it's like, honey, we can't do this anymore. We can't afford it. So, let's do this one more. And he gets the movie, which is crazy. One of those stories, right? But anyway, he was quite young. And I think that there was a general feeling that maybe, he didn't have a lot of singing experience. And I think there was just a sense that his voice wasn't quite up to snuff. And so they had another kid who auditioned, Andrew, I think his name was. Am I right? You guys might know this. But anyway, he did the vocal on the first one. Yeah. The album went through the stratosphere. So all the kids got rich off of singing on the album except Zach. So on the second movie, Zach's like, I'm singing. And and he did the work, and that's, good for him. He put in the time and had vocal coaching, and I think he probably had a little, auto-tune help, but who doesn't these days? And he worked his ass off and got his dough, and he did it on the third movie.
Sure. I would do the same.
That's so funny.
It was probably a little unfair to him. He might have been cheated out of it a bit because he was capable of it, I think. Remember, we were also doing these very, very low budget. So we had, a few weeks of prep. There wasn't a lot of time to have vocal coaching. Like, just wasn't good. It wasn't really an option.
That makes sense.
Yeah, and that was definitely before, like, I think Disney as like a move tried to like hire more triple threat type of people.
Yep.
Really prepared to do all three.
Yeah.
Yeah, you should. I mean, some of these kids that I've worked with since then are just ridiculous. Like the talent level is unreal. Like I don't know where they come from.
Yeah, definitely. We were also wondering, like, if working, you seem very fond of working with Disney, but does it also change the process a little, like, like compared to other movies?
Like having to get the Disney stamp of approval.
It's a funny animal. I think a lot of people think there's a big rule book. Like, here is the, put the big family Bible on the table, and this is the code of ethics and the code of, these are the color schemes and the things and all that. And it's not true. Like there's a lot of wiggle room inside what you think the Disney brand is. Hire outside people like me and Kenny and, to try to bring a new perspective. And so, sure. Do they want it to be colorful? Absolutely. Do they want it to be, do they want a visual to support these stories that are, oftentimes very fun? The conflict levels are minor at best, and, but within that, there's all kinds of space to move. And I think it's really important, if you guys are going to be writers and people listening to this show want to work as maybe creatives in the business, that you have a lot of bosses. Like I'm a big boss, but I have a lot of bosses over me. The director is my most immediate and probably most important boss. I work for them the most directly, but I've also got the studio. I'm working all the time. I was working for Kenny Ortega or Paulo, and I'm also working for the studio that have their own. Those executives bring their notes, which are oftentimes very random and kind of don't get it, but they sit in meetings all day, so they have reasons for asking what they're going to ask. But it's what's really critical to remember is who you're making the movie for is really the end user, right? So yes, a lot of these movies are for teens and tweens. That does not mean that it's unserious filmmaking. It doesn't mean, this is an audience who is as deserving of engaging and interesting and entertaining media as any other audience. They do have, kind of different takes, but I wouldn't call them unsophisticated. I think young people are watching for slightly different reasons. Here's an example. The three of us could go out this weekend and see a rom-com, right? We could see some Jennifer Aniston, handsome guy rom-com, and it'd probably be just fine, right? And we wouldn't think too much about it, and we wouldn't agonize over it. Well, as you guys know, having been that young audience, they engage, like the engagement is pretty intense, and it's repeat. Like a lot of these kids will watch these movies 20 times sometimes.
That's our entire right? Yeah.
They learn all the choreography and they know every note of every song, but also, story. They're really, I think one thing I found interesting working for that audience is, the Disney Channel is largely, majority probably a girls' interest network. Not to say that there aren't plenty of boys who watch, and there are a lot of boys who watch anonymously. So let's give them their space and not rat them out because they don't want their friends to know. But the girls who watch it, there's a real interest in the intensity of friendships between female characters in these stories.
Yes, very true.
That's really, really important to them. So, you just learn, like my next job could be making a Saw movie, right? And I've worked in horror, and horror is a lot of fun. It's weird. It's a funny space to work in, but it's a lot of fun. But there are horror fanatics. There are people who that's all they watch. They love horror movies. You've got to learn how to talk to the specific literacies of that audience, right? So if I bust out like my High School Musical bona fides and someone's not impressed by it, then I'll bust out my Army of Darkness bona fides and, all of a sudden, all the weird Simpsons comic book guys I meet in my life are like, oh my God,
Oh my gosh.
ever,
Yeah. I love that.
So it's just, it's funny, Disney, like working for Disney, it's really more about working for the audience.
Yeah. I think like something that I loved about Disney Channel growing up was how cool the rooms looked. Like
Yes.
even just in the TV shows, like I always wanted to live in those bedrooms. They were so fun.
Yeah.
And I wanted my room to look like that. That's just like a key aspect of Disney Channel movies, is having like the world's coolest house
bedroom that like perfectly like matches your personality and everything you're into.
It's very impressive when you like I still don't feel like a lot of movies really like
think about that,
can do that as well as Disney can, which I really like. So
well, that's another thing I think we've kind of or in my observation about the audience, and I do remember, who was it, one of the execs having this conversation with me about bedrooms, that for a young audience, very often the one part of the actual world they have any control over is their bedroom. And so that becomes a critically important space, to see their characters inhabit. And because design is, production design is really storytelling, what story am I telling the audience about, Gabriella's bedroom or Sharpay's bedroom, or, how does this illuminate the character in certain ways? Now, there's also an lack of realism to it. So when I was that kid growing up, the movies that were very common, for that age group were like the John Hughes movies, like, 16 Candles, Pretty in Pink, all that kind of stuff. And, I grew up, we looked very kind of lower class. We weren't necessarily, but this is how hoarders live. And so to me, I would watch those movies and they were a little unrealistic. It's like, oh my God, look at that house they live in. Look, everything's clean. There's no holes in the carpet. Like the windows aren't broken, there was a certain unreality to it. So I kind of have described myself, for better or worse, as an engine of disappointment as a designer, because, I make proms that no kid is ever going to go to.
Yeah.
Right?
I know. Oh my God.
Proms.
We were just talking about this the other day. We were like, why weren't our proms like a Disney movie?
Yeah.
Because you didn't have $750,000 for the prom committee and two 40-foot trailers full of programmable lights from PRG in Atlanta. It's like and a crew of 40 to run it. So it's fun to create those aspirational spaces for young audiences. And then where I get a little alleviation from being an engine of disappointment is we do something crazy, like, some huge prom, like at the end of Zombies 2 or something. And then a school might pull that off in their own way. And what bridges the gap is the incredible imagination that youth is generally gifted with, and it's a shame that society conditions us to kind of lose that as we get older. I'm one of those few very lucky people who makes my living doing that, right? To still have the imagination of the 8-year-old that came out of Star Wars, that made a completely humming with possibility. And I actually am not joking when I say that my collaborator on these projects is that 8-year-old, that 8-year-old boy. And I say to him, what do you think? And he's like, oh, it's cool. Let's do this. That's good. I kind of work for him.
Oh my gosh. That's definitely a very relatable thing. I think the wanting to continue your career and sourcing that from the child you were. That's such like an artist thing. That's such a thing around us too, like at an arts college. So
yeah, I think it's important to protect. You're gonna the world is gonna make different demands on you as you pass through it, as you guys already know. But if you can kind of preserve that, keep that flame alive in you somewhere to ignite at a later time, I think it'll serve you very well.
So I know we kind of touched on High School Musical, but I was thinking about the High School Musical like movies and those kind of like big musical movies that get the sequel and then the third movie, and how they each get like bigger and bigger every time. Is that like a challenge to kind of like outdo yourself and like every time?
That's a great question. And in a way, the outdoing is the fun part. You know, when Kenny or Paul, you know, Paul's kind of the watchmaker, Kenny's kind of the atom bomb. And but they both have this way of expanding, and that's what's expected of them, of course, to like deliver a bigger, better. But what I find challenging about having made so many sequels is how I always bone myself. I'm like, oh God, we did that in the first movie. Now I got to track that. How do we make sense of, you know what I mean? It's like, you need a bigger brain than I have to try to like make a part one that isn't just a minefield for part two, right? Where you've got this character that didn't really work out, and you've got this, you know, why did you design the clubhouse this way? It doesn't serve this, you know what I mean? And so there's a lot of like unwinding of imperfect ideas. Now, even with these bigger movies, you know, Disney was like, High School Musical was well under $10 million. Now we're, you know, like the latest Zombies or Descendants movies are far, far, far bigger than that. Even with those, with more prep time, more people, better professionals, a lot bigger brains all over the place, we're still in a hurry, you know? So a lot of decisions are made pretty rapidly, and even some fairly important decisions are made in the moment. So it's kind of hard to keep from blowing yourself up on part three, I guess. But it's always fun. You know, it's fun to see how, you know, like, you guys are probably older than the Zombies movies franchises.
A little, but we're slightly familiar.
Yeah, because of Paul, yeah.
So it's a very weird world we created with the Zombies. It's fun, it's crazy fun, but it's a very strange place. And as we tried to make the sequels, we were like, how do we do that? And we just said, you know what we got to do? We just got to embrace the weird. We can't run from it. We got to run right into it and just say that the world that Zombies took place in is this, but it's not America. It's not Earth. It's this bubble of existence where every B movie ever made happens in real life. So there's zombies and werewolves and aliens, and in the same way, maybe more familiar project to you guys, in the same way that we made Teen Beach. And even in the first movie, and that was for a director named Jeffrey Hornaday, who's kind of a wild man, very, very creative. He choreographed Flashdance when he was 22 or 23, like an amazing human being. So we made Teen Beach, and it was kind of me and him as the creative team, and we were way off in Puerto Rico, far from the studio. And I'm like, this is, you know, our kids going to understand this kind of like, you know, bikers and surfers and chewing on, you know, Jersey bikers chewing on their gum and all this like period weirdness. And we just decided if it was funny, they wouldn't care. Right. And so we just kept pushing the silliness and the weirdness and trying to find a top to go over on that movie. And we never found it. It's such a crackers movie.
Yeah.
And because of that, it's probably one of my favorite projects ever. Like, I think of my over 100 musical numbers I've been involved in, I think Cruisin' for a Bruisin' is still my favorite.
Oh my God.
It's so good.
So fun, right?
I remember they had on Disney like
to
a
teach you
tutorial
the dance moves
of how to do the dance,
Yeah.
and how to do the hair.
Yes.
I was
the beehive.
obsessed. I was obsessed
That
with
was her real hair. That was Chrissy Fitt's real hair.
and I would sit in my mom's room with her roller brush and be like,
Yeah. I feel like
teasing
they sold the 50s like energy
so well.
even though we like as kids didn't know anything about it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, it was that's it. You know, it's even before my time, right? But I was aware of kind of the Frankie and Annette beach blanket bingo movies. So I kind of they were kind of on the edge of my awareness. But you know, for tweens, it's like, okay, here's these bikers that have these weird accents, and there's, you know, the weather control machine. It was all very Scooby-Doo, but just as fun as hell.
Yeah.
And then, you know, we had great professionals. Ruth Carter was the costume designer, and she's now won, you know, an Academy Award for Black Panther. So we had a lot of big brains around the table there.
That's really very cool. I mean, you just kind of shared a favorite memory, but do you have any other funny stories or behind the scenes like tidbits of any projects you've worked on that
Which one do you want to hear about? Let me see if I can.
Well,
there's so much to choose from.
like, I mean, I feel like we would have to stay in like the realm of what we know of like
Yeah.
thousands,
High School
musicals.
We talked about Read It and Weep on our podcast as well.
Yeah.
So I think that was the first movie I did with Paul. And Paul and I have probably done 7 or 8 movies. He's a super good friend. We've probably done 7 or 8 movies together. Because it wasn't a musical, it wasn't very splashy, and I don't remember a ton about that show. Are you guys in the Good Luck Charlie, It's Christmas?
That's our next
we are actually like watching Good Luck Charlie, It's Christmas for the podcast in like a week or two.
Okay. So it's timely.
So if we wanted to know if you have any like things that we should look out for in our watch, or like little tidbits that we might.
So one story that's really funny from that's just so like, I don't know, it made me laugh, was when the mom and the daughter, I can't remember characters' names off the top of my head right now. The mom and the daughter get their car breaks down, or whatever happens, they're stranded in that little mountain town, and they go to the gas station and buy that car for like, what was it, $50 or something. That car is called a Yugo. Now, do you know anything about Yugos? So Yugo, before the USSR collapsed, there was a communist built car on the American market that was made in communist Yugoslavia called the Yugo. And it was a joke. It was like a running joke, because they were shit cars. Like you can imagine, they barely worked. You couldn't get parts for them, but they were super, super cheap, right? Little economy cars. So the joke was, they go buy this Yugo, and then when they turn it on, it starts playing like the Russian national anthem. I don't know if you remember that.
No.
Right?
Oh my God.
But it was, so we had to buy 3 of them. They're almost impossible to find. Some collector had one that was working, which was unbelievable. So we got that one. And then we got another one for parts that someone was using as a chicken coop. And then we've got a third one that is the one that falls apart on cue. Remember that? Which is a really funny gag. It just disintegrates while they're standing there. Which was a pretty complicated gag, and it actually worked out. But I don't know why I think this is so funny, but the one that was a chicken coop actually had a CD player in it. And when we finally got a battery into the car and it kind of turned on a little bit, it spit out a CD. And the CD had written on it in Sharpie, "Crazy Hip Hop Mix." And crazy was spelled with a K.
Oh my God.
Like, oh my God, this is the greatest treasure ever.
Oh, that's so funny.
And we couldn't get it to play. Like, we put it must have been some like Eastern European CD technology.
That's like a relic. That's wonderful.
Yeah. But that's the kind of thing that just happens all the time in the film business. The script says, and writers do this to me all the time. The script says, haha, Yugo's funny. Oh God, I gotta find Yugo. So you start calling around. Let's see. Here's another good story, real quick. Has to do a little bit less with cars, but High School Musical 3,
Also
the junkyard,
yeah.
right? The boys are back. That bit. So the script says junkyard, right? The boys go to a junkyard and get this radiator cap or something for Zach's truck. I don't know if you've been to a junkyard, a car junkyard in the past 20 years, but cars now are all just plastic and they don't, they don't age well, like old rusty steel American cars. They look cool when they age and they're big hulking things and they've still got some color. So I didn't want a modern junkyard. And I said, we got to find a junkyard that's full of like old American muscle cars. Impossible. Like we just couldn't find one. So I was with the location manager. We're driving someplace else, way out in the desert. We're driving by this big plywood fence. And as I'm passing by, I look in this open gate and there's just these piles of old American cars. And I was like, what? So we spin around, we go in, and that's what it is. It's like 1,000 muscle cars just stacked up. It looks fantastic. So we find the owner. He's a very nice little old guy. And he's just kind of a putterer. And he fixes like one or two up a year to sell. And he makes them mint condition. So he sells them for like $200,000 and it's a living, right? So I told him what we were doing. I said, this is the third installment of a very successful movie franchise. He'd never heard of it. The decade, I guess. He was really cool and heard us out. And I said, we want to rearrange this area and do like a dance number in it. Would you be willing? And he's like, it just sounds like a pain in the butt. I'm like, money's kind of no object right now on this project. Like, we'll make it worth your while. I promise you. He's like, yeah, you guys seem nice, but I just don't think I want to do it. And I'm like, ugh. So I said, here's my card. Anything changes, call me. We were getting the governor's office involved. High School Musical was a big deal to the Utah film industry at the time. And so a couple of days later, my phone rings and they say, Mark, it's Rick from the junkyard. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll put him through. So I answer the phone and he says, hey, Mark, it's Rick. I'm like, yeah, Rick, you change your mind? He's like, well, I didn't want to, but I've got these granddaughters. And they said, if I don't let you shoot here, they're never going to talk to me again.
As they should.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I went and spent 2 weeks with him and he drove a forklift and we built the buildings there. And then he put all the cars in that big horseshoe and he had the time of his life. And the Disney execs came and met him and the governor came and took pictures with him and the governor's kids and just turned into a whole thing. His granddaughters, Kenny gave them like the whole star treatment. They sat at Video Village and they got to watch the monitors with him. And so they met Zach and Corbin and everybody. So
Cool.
yeah, the film business has a real power.
Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
sweet.
I was also thinking about, like, now that we're talking about High School Musical 3, the like tree house and how it doesn't make any sense, but it's like the ideal dream, like tree house. Like it doesn't work, but I love it.
See, this is the difference because I've done, probably an equal number of projects with Paul and Kenny. So this is kind of the difference between the two of them as visionaries. Whereas Paul would say exactly what you're saying. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So we got to figure something else out. Where Kenny would go, put a 12-story treehouse with a place for the yacht to come tie up and a hot air balloon. And he doesn't care. Like it's to Kenny, the world is just a series of big moments with a little dialogue to tie them together. Paul's much more focused on, the mechanics of the story. So, we had this big, beautiful house in a very nice part of town that was playing for Zach's place, and there was no tree house. There was no tree. So we had to find somebody who was cutting down some trees, and we craned them over this house. It's like a $2 million house. And so everybody's sweating. We're moving these giant tree trunks over the house in a crane. We had the power lines moved, and we drilled these big holes in their backyard and sunk the tree trunks in, and then built the tree house into it. And the whole treehouse popped apart with like hinge pins, because then we had to move it from the backyard to a blue screen stage on a turntable for the end of the musical number. But that's very classic Kenny. You'll say, "Oh, but isn't that too big?" And he'll just kind of stare at you blankly, like,
bigger. Yeah.
"Gotcha. Okay. All right, boss. That's what we're doing."
That's so
Yeah,
funny.
more is more is more. He's it sounds like I'm complaining about him, but I'm not. He's
Oh no,
No.
he's an absolutely critical mentor in my life, and taught me so much.
Bring a lot, it sounds like, which
Yeah.
is really cool. So do you watch the movies that you produce? I know sometimes people are like, oh God, I can't, but
It really depends. A lot of times I don't, because you guys, I'm not selling you short, but an audience might watch and not understand all the processes that the A to B to C that led to D, right? So you'll see a scene and it probably works fine and everything's okay. Whereas I may watch it and all I see is every compromise and every lack. We wanted to do this and the money wasn't there and they wouldn't let us do this, or we didn't have time to do this, or it unexpectedly rained that day. So we ended up shooting this in a place that I didn't have any time to properly treat. And a lot of times I won't, because it just makes me cringe. Kind of makes my butt pucker. Like, I'll watch the musical numbers a lot, because just that, if we're going to spend all the money, we're going to spend it on those moments, right? So if I'm in a depressed mood, something like Cruising for a Bruisin' will inevitably make me
that's so
smile.
cool.
And I saw the other day on YouTube, it's been viewed like 250 million times.
That Teen Beach movie, I'm always in conversation with people about these Disney movies and whatever, just because of me and Pierre are always recording every week. There's a new movie for us to watch, and people always say there's a few favorites. Teen Beach is always up there,
And then Cloud Nine.
Cloud Nine is always up there.
Oh yeah. Oh, that was a miserable show.
Yeah, that's what we heard.
Hardest thing I've ever done. It was, of course, it had to be the coldest and the snowiest winter, either on record in Utah or in 70 years.
But it paid off. It is a lot of people's favorite movies. So
well, I'm glad you think so. I mean, the cast was cute, and once we got everything in place, it was pretty fun. But it was, I put this whole Metallica concert basically on the side of a half pipe.
Yeah.
And it took and half pipes are like this. They're very super steep and they're frozen.
Yeah.
It's not like you're trudging in the snow, you're walking on a sheet of ice, like an ice rink. And so we had lots of injuries, people falling off, people falling into the half pipe, equipment sliding down the hill and getting destroyed. And then, it took 4 movie generators to run those lights. And it got so cold that the diesel fuel in the generators froze.
Oh my God.
I mean, it was miserable. It was just I've never watched that.
Yeah.
I just can't go back. I can't. It'll make me feel cold to my bones if I watch that again.
Yeah, I don't think I would watch that if I had that experience either.
So funny.
But it's funny. It's either like the tropical Teen Beach or the Arctic, Cloud Nine that people like. Teen Beach was much more pleasant.
Fun.
Oh,
yeah, polar.
Polar.
Yeah, sorry.
We also were, not to age you, but you've been working with Disney for nearly 20 years.
Yeah.
What kind of changed in working with them for so long?
Yeah, it's a couple of years ago, they were doing some, I think it was coming up on their 100th DCOM or a Disney Channel original movie. And so they did some research and they were looking at the person who's done more Disney movies than anybody else. And it was me.
Oh.
And I'm like, oh my God, I'm a lifer. So I think depending on how you count it, I think I've done like 25, 26. There's a lot. So it definitely has changed, when I did Buffalo Dreams, and I think it was Go Figure. It was my second movie, and then Life is Rough, and then High School Musical, till the last, until Descendants 3 was quite a change. Like, remember, as I was telling you, the budgets were so small on those first movies, and to be fair, the demands weren't giant. Like, they were contemporary stories about modern kids in school. So you can use them on, an existing school, you can use existing houses, you can use existing, malls and an office space for dad's office or whatever it is. Then when High School Musical happened, all of a sudden, nobody really expected this. All of a sudden, they were the tip of the spear of youth culture. And that's when when I say it happened overnight, it happened overnight. Like, it was stratospheric. Kenny, within months, was on a global stadium tour with the kids doing the songs. I think he said they sold out the biggest soccer stadium in Brazil 2 nights in a row. Right. I mean, it was that gigantic. And so, all these perfectly nice people and studio executives at the channel are suddenly like, holy shit, like we have the keys to the kingdom at this point. And so everything expanded very quickly. Like, budgets went up and expectations went up, and they wanted to make a bunch more musicals. And so it was really fun to be part of that, to see something change so drastically and then be trusted to be one of the partners to foment that change. Right. So we just kept going and going and going and going. And, there were obviously not everything did as well as High School Musical, but I have been, in the room as billions of dollars were made for Disney, for the channel, which kind of what it wasn't designed for that when it originally came out. Unfortunately, now it's going through another change, which is the economics of the business are very weird suddenly, with post-COVID and streaming. And I think, Disney spent so much on their streaming platform, and certain things aren't as profitable as they had hoped. It's all profitable. It's just not printing money at the scale they had hoped. And then they had some bad leadership, and then it's kind of a mess, and the priorities there feel different. So I should count myself grateful that I was present for their real renaissance. And we'll see what shakes out of whatever's happening next.
So I guess this is our last question, we can just close out from here. But if you have anything you're working on right now that you can share with us or plug your upcoming projects, we would.
Yeah, I don't right now. We've had these strikes, which have been tough for all of us. I mean, I'm really glad that the writers and the actors got the piece of the pie that they have, that they richly deserve. It took a long time to get there. And then right before the strike, I finished what is essentially Descendants 4. So it's kind of in the Descendants universe, but it's a slightly different direction. It's not a Kenny project. So it's some new names, some new blood. So we'll see how that turns out. We'll see how the audience likes it, because it's not the familiar stomping ground that Descendants was. And then other than that, if anybody listening to your podcast is hiring, I'm a free agent.
like my mom. It's like, I don't know, but thank you. Oh my gosh.
Well, listen, there is a part of me that's like, okay, the only way that I'm going to continue in this industry is if the kids who loved my movies grow up and become studio execs and start hiring me. And I'll tell you what, real quick, it's kind of happened. Whereas David Henry, right? David Henry, who was in Wizards.
Wizards, yeah.
He's all grown up, and he had a little independent movie, and he remembered me from back on Wizards and wanted to hire me to do this indie movie. And so I'm like, oh my God, it's literally happening. Like a Disney kid has grown up and is now making movies. I couldn't do it because of a conflicting project, but
yeah, but that's still so cool. Like, what a
So
so you guys hurry up and get important roles in the business.
we're working on it.
Yeah.
We're working on it.
Yeah.
We'll try.
Yeah. We really appreciate your time. This is really wonderful.
Yeah.
Same. No, I like talking about the business, and it has, given me a wonderful life and a great direction in life, and something to do other than stare into the middle distance. So it's good. Great. And continued success with your show, and wish you guys all the best. And I'll let me know if I can help with anything else.
Thank you so much. Have a
Yeah,
great
my pleasure.
Great. Bye.
Okay. Have a good day.
All right. So we just wrapped up our interview with Mark. That was great.
It was so wonderful. What a sweet guy.
I'm also like obsessed with us. Like, I feel like
I feel like we're the best. I don't know.
But like, I feel like we're getting so good.
We're getting so good.
We're getting so good.
Yeah.
And like, literally to think about like the fact that man has like made the vision of my favorite childhood movies possible is so insane. Like, the more I thought about it, I was like, High School Musical 3, The Treehouse, The Rooftop,
the dancing scene in Teen Beach, like, all of Cloud 9. Like,
it's all clicking.
Yeah. Oh God, like he said this in the interview himself, but he was there for the renaissance of Disney.
Yes.
And that is just so...
Oh my God, I forgot to ask about Cheetah Girls.
That was so great. What a
that was so fun. What a G.
What a like humble guy too. Yeah. Like he's literally worked on every Disney movie ever.
He's worked on
like
the most Disney movies out of anyone ever.
And he still agreed to like
hang out with
us for an hour.
Over an hour.
Yeah, which is so wonderful and cool.
That's so great. Like, I'm just...
What a life to live.
I'm so like shocked by people. Like, I feel like people in the industry have this bad like air about them, that they're all like stuck up and in their own thing. But like, the more people we talk to and the people that are so open about like their experiences and stuff, like, I'm just like, these people are awesome.
Yeah. Like, and they always have such good like advice for us, because we can all really relate being like art students and like wanting to be artists and do creative things with our life. They always offer like a little bit of information that I find like is so like caring, that they're like,
and it's great to see like everyone's different path too. Like, so we've interviewed like 3 people now, and they've all had such different like ways to getting into like the industry and where they are now.
It always makes me feel very hopeful. I'm like, it's not useless. Like,
and like
everything I'm
the
doing.
things he was saying about like having a plan. I'm like such a person with a plan, and I'm like, I need a plan, but I know like not everything's gonna go to plan all the time.
It's just so
I just feel like
good.
we're like, it's so weird. Like, I feel so like, I think we said this last time, but like, I feel so connected to something that was so important to me.
Yes, agreed. And like being
like a
able
direct
to
connection.
Being able to tell these people who like who had the intention of like making it special for us, that it was really special for us. Like, that just made me really happy. Like, being like, oh my gosh, like,
this meant so much to me.
Like, looking at that bedroom in Wizards of Waverly Place, like, was all I wanted. Like, it just so, like, we talk, every podcast, we talk about how cool the rooms are. And, like, and I just loved his outlook on like, kids movies, that like just because they're for kids doesn't mean that kids are unsophisticated or the art is not good enough. Like, we experience that ourselves. Like, I feel like you want to write like YA rom-coms too, and like in like the field that we're in at Emerson, you have to be like this prestigious
I think it's
prose
very,
writer.
It feels nice hearing that, because it is so scary. Like I'm applying to grad school right now, and I just like, I have a big fear that no one's gonna take me seriously because I care about writing for a younger audience, and like I have all these like amazing people that are telling me like, no, that's those are the people that are important.
Yes, and like just like so much like positivity, and I love interviewing these people because they always have so much like good stuff to say.
Yeah. So if you were in the biz or involved in any of the things that we talk about on the podcast, shoot us an email,
because we will feel better after. You will feel better after.
Yeah,
I'd like
to think that it's a mutual loving experience.
Yeah, and if you're in the biz and you want to hire our buddy or us, do that as well. You know, if you keep listening, maybe there will be more.
Anyway, thank you so much for listening to this episode of Child of the Trash. You can follow Child of the Trash Pod on Instagram at Child of the Trash Pod.
On TikTok.
And
you can follow Pia at Pia La Placa.
And you can follow Maggie at Maggie and Keating.
Thank you for listening.
Bye!